Hello and welcome to the episode 4 of our Deal Contingent Hedging series. My name is Jane and I am an AI-generated avatar created for the Studio Bellanti.
In previous episodes, we discussed about what is a deal contingent trade, what are the main contractual aspects companies should care about, and how the pricing of the instrument is derived.
Today, we will aim to address some of the most common questions companies ask about deal contingent hedging. These are real questions that we have been asked by real companies.
And by the way, my name is Ravi, and I am also an AI-generated avatar. Jane, over to you.
So Ravi, let's start with the most common question we are usually asked. Are there minimum amounts required to trade DCH transactions?
Thanks for asking this question, Jane. So, yes, there are, and for several good reasons.
Oh, okay. And can you give me more color?
Of course. So, implementing a DCH necessitates extensive due diligence, involving expertise from various fields such as legal, credit, commercial, and product structuring. This process incurs significant fixed costs which need to be offset by the operation's margin to be economically viable. Consequently, smaller transactions may not generate enough return to justify the required effort. However, it's worth noting that the minimum transaction size has decreased over time due to increased competition, to the streamlining of processes within banks, and to standardized documentation, which simplifies the due diligence phase. While deals under $200 million were not considered a decade ago, amounts as low as $40 or $50 million are now feasible for FX transactions.
Thanks, Ravi. Still very sizable deals, but certainly not so exclusive. Let's now move to the next question. This is one I personally like very much. Do DCHs come only in all-or-nothing formats, or are there intermediate options?
This is an interesting question, Jane. So, while a classic DCH typically does not settle if completion does not occur, there are indeed structures that require settlement within defined minimum and maximum limits based on contractual parameters. An example would be the outcome of a public purchase offer in foreign currency, where the exact shareholder participation, and thus the required FX amount, is unknown beforehand. Be aware that this is the theory, and not all banks may be prepared to offer such variation.
Thanks, Ravi, as I suspected. Okay, Ravi, now, let me ask you something a bit different. Could I use a deal contingent forward to manage the FX risk arising from ordinary commercial flows?
Jane, thanks for asking this question, since it gives me the opportunity to make a very important clarification. So, I am interpreting your question as to the possibility of using DCH to manage FX risks within the company's ordinary operations. For example, a company that exports retail products will not know the amount of future turnover in foreign currency until the end of the commercial cycle and will therefore have to base its hedging decisions on internal estimates. Is this the scenario you had in mind?
Yes, Ravi, you got the point.
Okay, so while it is understandable how a deal contingent could be useful to get exactly the amount of hedging needed in my example, it is extremely unlikely that any financial service provider would be able to offer a DCH for this eventuality. This is because there is no formal event to define completion, making it contractually challenging to manage the product effectively. Additionally, sales volumes could be significantly influenced by the company's own commercial and pricing strategies, introducing a level of unpredictability that banks are typically unwilling to accept.
Understood. So the short answer is no, right?
Correct. This is not the type of situations the DCH is designed for.
Okay, Ravi, let's move on to the next question then. Are DCHs subject to EMIR reporting?
So, you are now moving to a completely different field, that is regulatory treatment. I am fine with it. Okay, so like most derivative products, deal contingent products fall under EMIR and UK EMIR regulations. So the answer is a straight yes. A point of discussion has been whether DCHs, particularly FX-related ones, should be subject to collateralization and variation margin obligations. The prevailing view is that since DCHs result in a physical FX exchange at maturity, these obligations may not apply to many users.
Thanks, Ravi. I am sure that sooner or later, I will find one topic you are not familiar with. There must be one. So, Ravi, tell me one thing. Can every bank offer deal contingent products?
That's an interesting question, Jane. This is one of those where no exact answer exists, but let me try articulate my thoughts. So, in theory, any bank authorized to offer derivative products could provide a DCH. However, effectively managing such products requires extensive infrastructure, expertise, and risk management capabilities, typically found only in the largest banks. Critical considerations include conducting thorough due diligence, understanding the economic sector involved, managing the absence of a dedicated market for pricing these products, and ensuring collaboration among internal stakeholders within tight timelines. These factors significantly influence a bank's ability to engage in DCH transactions effectively.
Okay, so are you saying that only large banks can do it?
Well, not really, but let me mention some critical issues. Firstly, conducting an effective due diligence to appreciate the risks of failed completion requires, on the part of the bank, in-depth knowledge of the economic sector in which the company operates, who the main competitors are, who the authorities are who can intervene in the process. Think of a DCH that supports a hostile takeover bid. How would the bank appreciate the risk of failed completion due to a counterbid launched by a competitor if this bank did not know the competitive framework of that sector inside out? Or how would it assess the risk of a stop by the regulator if it were no longer familiar with the most recent regulatory or even political dynamics of that sector?
Interesting.
Secondly, deal contingent products do not have their own market in which to find prices to buy or sell. These deals therefore remain on the bank's balance sheet. Does the bank have sufficient risk appetite and financial capacity to sustain even high losses in the event of failure to completion?
This is a very good point, actually.
Thirdly, has the bank developed internal processes to ensure that its internal actors, lawyers, M&A specialists, product structurers, credit analysts, can collaborate effectively in the very short time frame usually available to carry out all the work necessary to produce a DCH proposal? Note that, in our experience, this last factor plays a key role in a bank's ability to systematically enter into DCH transactions.
Okay, understood. So it is not much the size of the bank per se, but rather whether or not it has structured itself to offer the product efficiently, let's say through an industrialized process. Is this a fair recap?
Jane, your recaps are always fair.
Let me ask a final question. I'm sure this will be an easy one. Does the bank that provides a DCH also have to be a lender or an advisor?
Let me find the best way to respond to this one. So, in theory, it is not necessary for the bank, supplier of DCH, to also be a lender if a financial package is involved, or to have a role as M&A advisor if it is an M&A deal. It's not essential, but it helps a lot.
Can you clarify?
In fact, let's always remember that the possibility of offering a DCH with competitive pricing requires the bank to have access to complete due diligence, or most of it, in order to correctly evaluate the risk of the transaction. An outsider, even if invited by the client company, could have access to this information with greater difficulty than an insider. The matter then becomes more complicated when changes to the documentation occur during the window period, that is the period of time between the negotiation of the DCH and the completion date. In a previous tutorial, we saw how it is essential for the hedge provider to be made aware of and possibly have the right to veto changes that would alter the probability of completion. If the hedge provider is not an insider in the underlying trade, it becomes more difficult to derive these rights for him. Lastly, if it were then a deal contingent swap, which turns into a long-term fixed floating swap, it will most likely be a question of understanding how to protect the rights of the hedge provider, who is not also a lender, avoiding it ending up in a subordinate position compared to other creditors.
I see what you mean.
So, to summarize, it is not impossible for a non-advisor or a non-lender to offer a DCH, but there would certainly be a lot more work for its lawyers.
I think we covered all we needed to talk about. Would you agree, Ravi?
We did, Jane, but I am sure there will be many more questions that will arise as we delve deeper into the matter.
You are absolutely right, Ravi. For those who wish to learn more about deal contingent hedging, please visit our website, studiobellanti.com. Feel also free to get in contact with the studio and present your case.
Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, do let us know by adding a like.